in that. It says in Hebrews 12, verse 1, it says, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us strip off and throw aside every unnecessary weight and sin which so easily clings and entangles us." And here's my favorite verse in the Bible: let us run. Say with me, let us run. All right, if you know me, I love running. Let us run with endurance and steady and active persistence the appointed course of the race that is set before us. We know that verse well. We know the second one equally well. It says, looking away from all distractions. Say that with me. Looking away from all distractions. Where I've lost my place. Looking away to Jesus, who is the leader and the source of our faith, and is also its finisher. Here's the part that I got excited, because for years, every time we got to Good Friday, I was like, but why was it good? It was a bad day. It was a tough day. How many of you know it was a tough day for Jesus? All right? And I'm going, God, why was, it's not Good Friday. It was terrible Friday. It was hard Friday. It was tough Friday, right? And yeah, in verse 2, somewhere halfway through 2, it says, He for the joy. Can you say that with me? He for the joy of obtaining the prize that was set before him, endured the cross, despising and ignoring the shame, and he is now seated at the right hand of God. And if I had to title the message, it would be For the Joy. Him, Jesus, for the joy, pursuing the joy, with the joy in mind, with the joy in focus. Nothing else. Not the pain, not the shame, not the suffering. For the joy. Can I just see how many people in this room are pursuing the call on your lives for the joy? Can I see just your hand? Okay, half the room. We're going to pray for the rest. That by the end of the service, the entire room is pursuing God's call on their lives for the joy. Just like Jesus, who endured the cross, as it says in Hebrews, for the joy. He ignored the shame. Can you say that with me? Ignored the shame. Can I see anyone in the room ever felt shame? Yeah, me. How many of you have ignored the shame? A few people. Some people in the room have. No, it says, He for the joy ignored the shame, despising and ignoring the shame, and he is now seated at the right hand of the Father. So my question is, if we're pursuing the joy, what is the joy? What is the joy? Okay, turn to the person next to you and ask them to answer that for you. What is the joy? What is the joy? The joy is four things. I hope they said the joy is God's righteousness, God's peace, God's victory, and God's prosperity. And in those four things you find fulfillment and you find joy. And Jesus is now seated, according to the word, at the right hand of the Father. Now, can I see how many people in the room believe that that's like his right hand? Can you just show me if you believe that? Okay, just put up your hand if that's how you, because I always saw it like that, the right hand. So put up your hand, put your right hand up if you're with me in that camp. Okay, all right. But have you ever heard of the phrase on the right side of the law? Does the law have a right and a left side? No, it's got a right and a wrong side. So Jesus is now seated at the right side, in the righteousness of God. He's seated in the right place. He can be seated all around God, but he's in the right place. He has authority that was always destined for him. So if you are seated in the right side of the Son, you're also seated in righteousness. Just like Ephesians 2 says, you are now seated in high places. Okay, that's if you're seated in high places. Verse 10, I just love Hebrews 12, verse 10. It says, I want to highlight the fact, he's talking about discipline, but he says, but he disciplines us for our certain good. Say with me, certain good. How many of you know Christ's victory was for certain good? I was hanging out with someone who was following the stock markets, and he's like, oh, it's good, oh, it's bad, oh, it's good, oh, it's bad, oh, it's good. How many of you want to live with the knowledge that it's certainly going to be good? We're not playing the stock market in life. When you have faith, you have certain good. And so God has given us His desire and He's given us His will. And from the beginning of time, in John 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And you know that whole verse if you know John 1. And He's painting a picture, and He's showing how man can only reach fulfillment if man's life conforms to the will of God. And I've been teaching our church, if you're visiting here, that God's will isn't an instructional thou shalt, because that's how people react to it, and they react negatively to the thou shalt. But God's will equals God's promise. So God says, if you live in my presence and you listen to my voice, you will certainly experience the joy of life. You will certainly experience fulfillment. You will certainly have peace. You will certainly have righteousness. You will certainly live in prosperity. You will certainly, what's the last one? Have victory in every area of your life. God's promise, like He promised Abraham, like He promised Joshua and Caleb, like He promised the Israelites. He says, I will give you the power to have wealth. I will give you the power to establish kingdoms. And spiritually, God's speaking to us, and He's saying, I will certainly give you life and life in abundance. But it also says in Hebrews 12, Jesus cheerfully submitted. And there's a difference between, now Jesus paid the ultimate price. He sacrificed His life. But there's a difference between surrender and sacrifice. Sacrifice is giving your entire life away. Surrendering is saying, I trust the process. Surrendering is rich. Cheerfully submitting is rich. It's going, wow, I trust the process. And as I surrender to the process and I'm obedient to His voice, I am going to see the goodness of God in my life. And there isn't going to be a single area in my life where I don't feel fulfilled, where I don't feel like I'm lacking. Why? Because God's got it all laid out for us. God's got the plan laid out for us. Now, Hebrews 12 alludes to, or it mentions the fact that Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, and it's quoting Psalm 110. And Psalm 110, in Psalm 110, it says, Jesus came in the, or is living, or He was established in the order of Melchizedek. Okay, now that's very random, and it was a very random concept to me until I started to just spend time in it and read up on it. And in fact, if you go read Hebrews 7, the writer is quoting that consistently. He's quoting in the order of Melchizedek. There's a whole piece on it, and it sounds very random and far off and weird. He's in the order of Melchizedek, but it's linked to the story of Melchizedek, who came to Abraham in Genesis. And we've been to that story so many times, but I hope I can paint it in a different picture and give it to you in a different light this morning. It says Jesus was established in the order, right? Say order. How many of you love order? How many of you love process? Okay, well, again, half the room, the rest are right-brainers. Okay, just going wherever they want to go. Okay, and so, we've got Abraham. He is, he's camping out in Canaan, and his brother Lot gets into trouble. His nephew Lot gets into trouble. But the context of the story is, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings vibes, but we're going to go with it. But there are 5 kings, and they've joined together in a what would you call that? Alliance. There we go. Bernadine's reading Lord of the Rings, so she's helping out here. And then there's 4 other kings that also formed an alliance, and they attacked the 5 kings. And then for 13 years, the 5 kings submitted to the 4 kings. But one day, the 5 kings rebelled. You guys still tracking with me? And then the 4 kings attacked the 5 kings. So you have 9 kings at war with each other. And it says the 4 kings chased the 5 kings across this valley of the pit, which then eventually became the Dead Sea. But basically, as they went and attacked them, they captured, the 4 kings captured the 5 kings' people and captured Lot and his family. And this is where Abraham gets into the story. Someone went to go tell Abraham, those 4 kings captured Lot with those 5 kings. So Abraham and his servants, and there's 319 servants that are trained, go out and kill all the kings except the 5. They kill the 4 kings, right? And they take everything back, and they bring everything back. They reestablish peace. Here's what I realized is happening, and we can draw from the story. The kings that are fighting represent people who are fighting at a worldly level. Because the whole thing starts off with, what you have is what I want. And so they go and they pressure them to give, they pay obedience to them. They pressure them. And eventually the 5 rebel, and there's fighting, and there's war, and there's worldly issues at play, worldly fights at play. And here's the thing, Abraham's not a part of it. He's outside of that stuff. He's not down there in the pits. He's up on the mountain. He's living life. He's living in the promise. Why? Because he was obedient. God told him to go. And he said, I will go and I'll follow you. But here's the thing. He increased in wealth and he increased in strength. I mean, come on. He's not even a king, and he's wiping out kings because of his strength, because of his ability, because of what he has. He's not engaged. And Melchizedek comes as the battle is won. Melchizedek comes. Melchizedek is also a king, but he's not engaged in the battle. His name means, you are my King of peace. And here he is, as the King of Salem, he is head of peace. And he's not in this fight either. But he does something incredible. Once the battle is won, he brings bread and wine. And he brings it, and he comes and he nourishes Abraham's servants. And he nourishes Lot. And he nourishes his family that has been captured. And it says this, because he was the high priest of God. Now, what that refers to is the fact that he manifested God's presence. And because he manifested God's presence, he had peace. And because he had peace, he had wealth. And because he had wealth, he could come and bless those who have just come from battle. Melchizedek is the king of peace and righteousness. Abraham is the leader of victory. He is the leader of prosperity. I want to just picture this. There are two rulers who are not engaged in worldly affairs. They're manifesting the presence of God in two different ways because they're not engaged in worldly affairs. I know it's 10 o'clock. Can I get a little bit more time? You guys with me? I want you to just turn to 1 Corinthians 2. Verse 2, Jesus says, not Jesus, Paul writes, he says, I resolve to know nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Remember, Hebrews said, looking away from all that will distract. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 2, I resolve to know nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Then it says this, Paul writes, he says, the wisdom that we are setting is a wisdom of God once hidden, but it is revealed to us. Who's us? Those who genuinely believe. And then it says this, which God devised and decreed before the ages of our glorification to lift us into the glory, to lift us up, to become rulers like Abraham, to become rulers like Melchizedek. But then it says in verse 8, none of the rulers of this age or this world perceived and recognized and understood this. I want to stop there first. It says that why? What's he pointing out? He's pointing out that the rulers of the day are too focused on what doesn't matter. They're too focused on worldly things. They're too focused on destruction, on they're too focused on fighting each other that they can't perceive the mystery, which isn't so mysterious anymore. It's the fact that we get to live in peace, we get to live in victory, we get to live in righteousness, and the whole world now is called to live in peace and righteousness and victory. But the rulers of the world don't recognize it because they're focused on each other, they're distracted. And it says in verse 8 here, it says, and if they had, they would never have crucified the Lord. Now here's a picture I don't know if you guys saw Passion of the Christ ever. How many of you watched it? How many of you remember it vividly? I went and just checked up the reviews. I go to rotten.com, and it's a good place to read up reviews on movies. The believers love it, the world hates it. The reviews are like, if you want to watch a man being butchered, then this is what you need to watch, step by step. Because vividly, it just portrays the agony, and the agony. And just when you think it can't get worse, it gets worse and worse and worse. And here's something I realized. I realized this. What the world sees when it sees Jesus' body being broken is the inside of the world's heart. Because here's what Jesus was subjected to. Jesus was not subjected to the wrath of God. Can I say that again? Okay, you guys say yes, but do you know why? Jesus was not subjected to the wrath of God. He was subjected to the wickedness of man. That's what he was subjected to. And the world looks and sees itself beating Christ and goes, I can't relate. Because it sees its own wickedness. You know that flogging with the glass tied into the leather straps, and the flogging and then the pulling, and kids, I'm sorry, but you probably haven't seen it, but the violence of it. God just revealed to me, those are the words of bitterness and the words of jealousy. That's the bitterness and the wickedness that man still uses against the man next door. It's the wickedness of man that's on display. Now, Isaiah says it was the Lord's will to subject him to that. But Jesus himself on the cross says, Lord, why have you forsaken me? God's act was the act of withdrawing and forsaking and subjecting Christ to the wickedness of man on full display. We've got the 9 kings in the valley being wicked to each other, killing each other, fighting with each other. The word I was looking for, the verse I was looking for, which was just so on my mind this morning coming, and I just can't remember the reference right now. But Paul asks, and it is here in this section, Paul asks, why is there bitterness and strife amongst you? And here's what I've come to realize. You can't defeat bitterness and strife by fighting in the valley. You can't defeat the person next to you by being sharper or having a razor tongue. The point is, he asks, why is there bitterness and jealousy amongst you? Because we're trying to fight a battle that we weren't meant to fight. Now, bitterness and jealousy is what's flying around the world right now. It's what's being used as a weapon. And as believers, we're not supposed to descend into the valley. We're not supposed to go down into that valley of the pits and put ourselves against other leaders or people in authority. And I say this because each one of us weigh ourselves against the person next to us. And it's like we compete against the person next to us. And if someone says something that might offend us or might hurt us, we want to get out the boxing gloves. And I'm focusing on bitterness and jealousy this morning because it's the root, it's a root form of wickedness that brings so much destruction to the world. But Jesus came to absorb the weight of wickedness so that you and I never ever have to fight that fight again. Where is your trust? Where is your hope? Where does it lie? Where are you placing your faith? What is the foothold that you have? What is the stance that you have in terms of certain good, in terms of God's blessing, in terms of the freedom that He has for you? Do you realize that Christ has won that victory? That you know, and you're sitting here going, no, but there's still some things I want to fight for. And I want to encourage you and challenge you to try, test God's word in terms of this. let God sort out what's not yours to sort out. As believers, we should stop worrying about what the world is doing, because it will lead to destruction. But we've got to rather know the promise, know deeply the promise that God has for each one of us, and be more focused on pressing forward in our promise so that we can become the Abrahams and the Melchizedeks of our cities, of our towns, of our families, of our communities. And stop worrying about what's happening in the political world, what's happening in the economic world, because Jesus already won a battle. He already defeated the wickedness of man, so that if you believe, you get to walk in that freedom and that wholeness. And one of the most powerful things I realized as we close is the fact that Melchizedek came and he presented the first communion. He came and he presented bread and wine, hear this, to those who had already been delivered, to those that had already been set free, and to those that were victorious. The bread and wine was not presented down in the battle before the battle was won. It was presented to those who had been delivered, who had been set free, and were now living in victory. As it says in Hebrews 12, He endured the cross so that you and I no longer have to be weary, so that you and I no longer have to be tired, so that you and I no longer have to be pressured and pressed, but that we can strengthen our hands and walk in courage. And this morning, I had this burning excitement to stand together in a room this morning and call on us, saying, I've been fighting a fight. If there's people in this room who are saying, I've been fighting a fight I wasn't supposed to fight. I've been ignited and inflamed by bitterness. I've been ignited and inflamed by jealousy. I've been listening to stories that rock my boat. I've been shook. I haven't been sure of the certainty in this life. I haven't been sure of what God promises us. This is not just about eternal salvation. This is about certainty. It is about experiencing righteousness. As Jesus said, Lord, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Which part of God's goodness are we leaving in heaven? And which part of it are we holding on to so that we can experience it now in the flesh, in the living? So I wanted to invite you to stand with me if you're that person who says, listen, I've been fighting battles I realize were not my battle to fight. My mind has been concerned about things that take over my mind. My spirit hasn't been at rest because I've been worrying. My heart has felt insecure. I'm not certain what tomorrow has for me. And if you're that person and you're saying, but I want to be rescued from that, and I want to live in absolute peace of heart, mind, and spirit, and for that I want to look at the victory of Jesus Christ, that even though He endured the worst that man had to offer, He still rose from the dead on the third day. And He still came with more life than you and I will ever experience, but He gives us that life. And He says, here is my life that I give to you, and you can now walk in that life. So I want to invite you, if you're that person who says, today I want to walk, if you're already walking in victory, then stand with us. But if for you, you're saying, I really want to live in God's peace, I really want to live with God's fulfillment and with God's joy, then just stand with me. And I just believe God's doing something in the room this morning as He's just releasing His victory in our hearts and in our minds. I'm going to invite the band to come up as well as we get ready to take communion. Lord, I just thank you for our time this morning, and I thank you for the fact that we get to come on a Friday where we look at the cross and we look at you on the cross, and we realize that in that moment, you took the keys of destruction. You took the keys of eternal pain. You took the keys of eternal loss and despair. You took them, and you now have given us victory in every area of our lives, in every single area. So Lord, I pray for every person that came into the room this morning feeling a little desperate, feeling a little despaired, feeling a little hopeless, feeling like the fight is too big and the victory too far. I pray, Lord, that each person in the room this morning will be touched by your presence in a surprising and special way. Lord, that a great peace will just come and cover this room. Because God, you conformed to your Father's will, and you established yourself in the order of Melchizedek, who brought peace and righteousness. And as you conformed, so the world can conform to your goodness. Lord, and we look and we see, Lord, that this victory is yours. The battle is yours. That we're not fighting flesh and blood, but Lord, that there are spiritual principalities that are being broken in hearts right now. And there's victory coming to every person in this room. There's a breakthrough coming in each one of our hearts as you set us free and you release us to have peace and to have hope and to have courage and to have faith.